You have exactly 3 seconds to decide if you want to live through dessert. The words hung in the salt-thick air of Marino's, a restaurant that didn't exist on any map, perched on wooden stilts above black water where the Atlantic met the coast. Lena Moore stood perfectly still, her hand wrapped around a wine bottle she'd been about to pour, her knuckles white against the dark glass. The man seated at table 7, Victor Hale, though she'd known him by 3 other names before tonight, hadn't even looked up from his phone when he'd spoken to her like she was a stain on his expensive suit. But that wasn't the voice that had shattered the evening's careful silence. That voice belonged to her. Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome back to another story that'll grip your heart and refuse to let go. I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below because I love seeing this community spread across the globe. And hey, if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button right now because we've got stories that'll change the way you see the world, one tale at a time. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next in this one. Now, let me take you back to that moment, the moment everything changed. The restaurant's foundation creaked with the rhythm of waves beneath it, a constant reminder that Marino's existed between worlds. Legitimate enough to avoid immediate suspicion, but remote enough that certain conversations could happen without curious ears. The kind of place where cash was preferred, names were forgotten by morning, and the staff knew that survival meant blindness and deafness. Lena had worked there for 8 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days. Not that anyone had asked. Not that anyone cared. She was furniture to them, the men in tailored suits who smelled of cologne laid over gunpowder, the women dripping in jewelry that could feed a neighborhood for a year, the enforcers who sat with their backs to walls and hands near holsters. They saw through her like she was made of the same ocean mist that rolled in each evening, swallowing the restaurant in a cocoon of grey anonymity. She'd learned to move like water, fluid, silent, unremarkable. Learned to keep her eyes down, her face neutral, her accent carefully flattened to remove any trace of the Brooklyn neighborhood that had shaped her first 18 years. Learned that men like Victor Hale didn't remember faces like hers unless given a reason. And Lena Moore had spent every single one of those 8 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days making absolutely certain she would never give him that reason. Until tonight. Victor had arrived at 7:30, precisely on time for his weekly meeting with the Calabrese family representatives. He'd chosen table 7, always table 7, positioned near the kitchen but with clear sightlines to both exits. Old habits from a man who'd survived 3 decades in a business where most didn't see 40. Lena had served him 17 times before this. 17 times, he'd spoken to her like she was an irritating echo, his words clipped and dismissive. 17 times, she'd swallowed every response that burned in her throat, let every insult slide off her like rain off oilcloth. But tonight was different. Tonight was the anniversary. 3 years. 3 years since the fire. 3 years since Lena had stopped being just Lena and became something else, something patient and precise, built from grief and fury in equal measure. You call this medium rare? Victor had said when she placed his steak in front of him, not bothering to look at her face, his attention fixed on the man across from him, Alessandro Calabrese, whose family controlled the waterfront from here to Boston. This is practically bleeding on the plate. Take it back. And this time, try actually communicating with the kitchen staff. You do speak English, don't you? The table had gone quiet. Even Alessandro, mid-sentence about shipping routes, had paused. Lena had felt it then, the snap. Like a wire pulled taut for so long it finally remembered it was made of steel, not silk. She'd set down the wine bottle with mathematical precision. Placed it exactly centered on the table, the label facing Victor because even now, even furious, had training held. Then she'd leaned in, close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she used, close enough that he had to acknowledge her existence, and met his eyes for the first time in 8 months. They were grey. Cold as winter sea foam. Hers were brown. And burning. Talk to me like that again, she'd said, her voice carrying across the restaurant despite being barely above a whisper, and see what happens. The words had landed like stones dropped into still water, ripples of shock spreading to every table. Conversations died mid-word. Silverware stopped clinking. Even the kitchen noise seemed to hush, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Victor's hand had frozen halfway to his water glass. 4-3 heartbeats, he'd simply stared at her, This nobody waitress who'd just committed professional suicide, possibly literal suicide, depending on his mood. Then his eyes had narrowed. A smile had touched his lips, but it never reached those grey eyes. "Excuse me." His voice was silk over razors. "What did you just say to me?" Lena hadn't stepped back. Hadn't broken eye contact. Hadn't even blinked. "You heard me perfectly, Mr. Hale. Or should I say Mr. Volkov? Or perhaps you prefer Vincent Harris, the name you were using in Brooklyn 3 years ago." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Because Lena Moore had just done the impossible. She'd used his real name, one of them, anyway, in a room full of people who dealt in anonymity like currency. She'd connected dots that shouldn't be connectable, revealed knowledge that should have been buried deep enough to stay dead. Victor's face had gone very still. The kind of still that came before violence, before decisions that ended with bodies in the ocean beneath them. But Lena was still standing there, one hand resting lightly on the back of the chair beside him, her posture relaxed despite the adrenaline surely screaming through her veins. And in her eyes, those burning brown eyes, was something that stopped him cold. Recognition. Not of him. He could see she'd known exactly who he was from the first time she'd served him. No, this was something else. Something that looked almost like anticipation. Like she'd been waiting for this moment. Planning for it. Like she wanted him to make a move. "Who?" Victor said slowly, each word measured and deadly. "Are you?" Lena had smiled then. Small. Sad. And absolutely terrifying in its certainty. "I'm the girl who's been invisible for 8 months, Mr. Hale. The one you've looked through 17 times while you discussed shipments and territories and profit margins." She paused, let the weight of her next words settle in the air between them. "The one who's been listening to every single word." Victor Hale had learned early in life that there were 2 types of people in the world, those who could be bought, and those who could be buried. In 3 decades of building his empire from the ground up, from a hungry kid running numbers in Chicago to the man who controlled distribution networks spanning 5 states, he'd never encountered a third option. Until now. He studied the woman standing before him with the focus he usually reserved for potential threats or profitable opportunities. Lena Moore, if that was even her real name, was maybe 5'6", slim in the way that came from missing meals rather than gym memberships. Dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, no jewelry except a small silver cross at her throat, the kind of face that should have disappeared in a crowd. Should have. But those eyes. Those goddamn eyes were looking at him like she could see straight through the carefully constructed layers of Vincent Harris and Victor Hale and Dmitry Volkov, down to the scared 14-year-old who'd watched his father bleed out on a kitchen floor because he'd borrowed from the wrong people. "Sit down," Victor said quietly. It wasn't a request. Around them, the restaurant remained frozen. Alessandro Calabrese had leaned back in his chair, one hand casually dropped below the table where Victor knew he kept a Glock 19. The 2 enforcers by the door had straightened, hands migrating toward concealed weapons. Even Maria, the 60-year-old owner who'd been running Marino's for 20 years as neutral ground for every major player on the East Coast, had emerged from the kitchen, her weathered face tight with concern. This was her establishment. Her rules. And rule number 1 at Marino's was simple: no drama. Drama brought attention. Attention brought badges and warrants and the end of the most profitable legitimate business any of them had ever seen. Lena didn't sit. But she did finally step back, creating a careful distance between herself and Victor. Professional space. Like she was simply a waitress who'd delivered an order and was waiting for the next instruction. Except for her hands. Victor noticed they weren't shaking. Weren't clenched. Weren't showing any of the telltale signs of fear or adrenaline crash that should have been flooding her system after what she'd just done. This woman had practiced this moment. Prepared for it. Maybe dreamed about it. That made her dangerous. "You want to talk?" Lena said, her voice steady. "Fine. But not here. Not with an audience." She glanced around the restaurant, meeting the stares of 24 criminals who were watching this interaction like spectators at a car crash. "Unless you want everyone here to know exactly what I know about your operation in Brooklyn. About the warehouse fire on Atlantic Avenue. About what really happened that night." Victor's jaw tightened. The warehouse fire. 3 years ago. The one that had killed 15 people, officially ruled an electrical malfunction, unofficially the result of a deal gone catastrophically wrong with a rival organization trying to move into his territory. He'd buried that incident deep, paid off everyone who needed paying, eliminated everyone who knew too much. Or so he'd thought. The office. Maria cut in, her voice sharp with authority that came from being the only truly neutral party in a room full of predators. She pointed to a door at the back of the restaurant. You want to have this conversation, you have it there. Away from my customers. Away from my business. Victor stood slowly, his 6'2" frame unfolding with controlled grace. He was wearing Tom Ford tonight, navy suit, crisp white shirt, no tie. He'd learned early that looking like money made people assume you had power, and assuming you had power meant they rarely tested whether you actually did. But he'd also learned that real power didn't need to be displayed. Real power was knowing exactly where to apply pressure to make someone break. After you, he said to Lena, gesturing toward the office. I'll go first, Alessandro interjected, standing as well. Whatever this is, hail, if it threatens the arrangement. It doesn't, Victor said, not taking his eyes off Lena. This is personal. Not business. In our world, Alessandro replied, there's no difference. Victor didn't argue. Because Alessandro was right. In their world, everything was business. Loyalty was business. Revenge was business. Even love, on the rare occasions it appeared, was just another transaction, another leverage point, another weakness to exploit. So what was this? Lena had already started walking toward the office, her movements efficient, like she'd mapped this route 100 times in her mind. Victor followed, Alessandro close behind, and Marco De Luca, Alessandro's right hand, a man who'd earned his reputation by being creative with a blowtorch, fell into step as well. The office was small, cluttered with decades of paperwork that Maria kept for reasons known only to her. A desk buried under invoices and receipts, filing cabinets that probably hadn't been opened since the 90s, a single window that looked out over the black water and the lights of the coast in the distance. Lena stood near the window, silhouetted against the glass, and for a moment Victor was struck by how small she looked. How utterly fragile against the vastness of the ocean behind her. Then she turned, and that fragility vanished. My name is Lena Moore, she began, but 3 years ago, I was Lena Castellano. My father was Antonio Castellano. My brother was Michael Castellano. Maybe those names mean something to you. Maybe they don't. Victor's mind raced backward. Castellano. He knew that name. Antonio Castellano had been a mid-level distributor, someone who'd worked the Brooklyn territory, moving product for various organizations depending on who paid best. A freelancer in a world that didn't usually tolerate freelancing. He'd been reliable, quiet, the kind of guy who showed up, did the work, and disappeared. Until he hadn't shown up anymore. Because he'd been in the warehouse the night it burned. Your father, Victor said slowly, pieces clicking into place, was one of the 15. 14, Lena corrected, her voice sharp as broken glass. The official count was 15, but you and I both know there were only 14 bodies in that warehouse. The 15th person walked out. Disappeared. And everyone was so busy covering up the fire, making sure no one looked too closely at what was really being stored there, that nobody bothered to count properly. Alessandro had gone very still. Marco's hand had drifted to the gun at his hip. But Victor was focused entirely on Lena, on the way her fingers had curled into fists at her sides, on the tremor in her voice that betrayed the emotion she was working so hard to control. You think I walked away, he said. Not a question. A statement. I know you were there that night, Lena replied. I know the fire started because of a disagreement between your organization and the Konstantin Bratva. I know my father and brother were caught in the middle when someone, probably someone from the Bratva, decided to send a message by torching the entire building. She took a step forward, and Victor noticed the way her hand moved to her pocket, then stopped. Like she'd reached for something and remembered not to. I spent 3 years, Lena continued, learning everything about you. About your roots, your contacts, your weaknesses. I worked my way into this restaurant because I knew you came here every week. I served you 17 times, and you never once looked at me long enough to recognize that I have my father's eyes. My brother's nose. That I'm a ghost you should have remembered. If you're looking for revenge, Alessandro said, his accent thickening with tension, You've picked a spectacularly stupid way to get it. You're alone, surrounded by people who could make you disappear before your next shift starts, and you just threatened one of the most dangerous men on the eastern seaboard. Lena's smile was bitter. I'm not looking for revenge, Mr. Calabrese. Revenge would be simple. Revenge would be a bullet, a knife, something quick and satisfying that would land me in prison for the rest of my life. She shook her head. No, what I want is much more complicated. What I want is the truth. Victor studied her carefully. 3 years. She'd spent 3 years preparing for this moment, building up to this confrontation. That kind of patience was rare. That kind of dedication was dangerous. But it was also useful. The truth, he repeated. About what happened in the warehouse. About who gave the order, Lena said. About who the 15th person was. About why my father and brother had to die for a territory dispute that had nothing to do with them. Her voice cracked slightly. They were just workers, Mr. Hale. They weren't soldiers. They weren't threats. They were just trying to earn enough money to keep our family afloat after my mother got sick. And there it was. The wound beneath the armor. The human pain underneath the calculated confrontation. Victor knew that pain. Had felt it himself at 14, watching his father's life drain out onto linoleum while his mother screamed. Had built his entire empire on the foundation of that pain, using it as fuel to ensure he'd never be helpless like that again. But pain made people unpredictable. Made them reckless. Made them do things like confront a mafia boss in a restaurant full of criminals because they'd spent 3 years obsessing over a tragedy they couldn't change. And if I give you the truth? Victor asked. What then? What exactly do you think that'll accomplish? Lena met his gaze without flinching. That depends entirely on what the truth is, Mr. Hale. Because I've spent 3 years gathering information. 3 years learning your business, your patterns, your secrets. And I know things that could hurt you badly if they ended up in the wrong hands. You're threatening me, Victor said, almost admiringly. With information you claim to have about my operations. That's bold. Also potentially fatal. I'm offering you a deal, Lena corrected. You give me the truth about that night, all of it, not the sanitized version you tell yourself to sleep better, and I give you something in return. What could you possibly have that I'd want? Alessandro interjected, clearly losing patience with this entire situation. Lena pulled her hand from her pocket. In it was a small USB drive, the cheap kind you could buy at any office supply store for $5. This, she said simply, contains documentation of every shipment that's moved through your network in the past 8 months. Dates, routes, quantities, buyer information. Everything I've overhead, photographed from documents left carelessly on tables, pieced together from conversations you all had because you thought I was too stupid or too invisible to matter. The room went dead silent. You're bluffing, Marco said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Lena held up the drive, let it catch the light. I've been a ghost in this restaurant for 8 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days. I've served at least 40 meetings between various organizations. I've watched deals get made, territories get divided, problems get solved. And I've remembered every single detail because that's what happens when you spend 3 years learning how to be invisible. You get really, really good at seeing everything else. Victor's mind was racing, calculating odds and outcomes. If she was telling the truth, and the specificity of her timeline suggested she was, then that USB drive contained enough information to potentially dismantle months of carefully arranged operations. Enough to expose routes to law enforcement if she was stupid enough to go that direction. Enough to reveal weak points to rival organizations if she decided to sell the information instead. It was the kind of leverage that started wars. You could have run, he said finally. Could have taken that information and disappeared. Sold it to the highest bidder. Instead, you confronted me. Why? Because, Lena said softly, I don't want your empire, Mr. Hale. I don't want your money. I don't even want you dead, despite spending 3 years imagining it in detail. She lowered the USB drive, closed her fingers around it. I just want to know why my family died. I want to look into the eyes of the person responsible and know that they remember. That my father and brother weren't just numbers in a casualty count. Victor recognized that need. That desperate, aching need for someone to acknowledge the loss, to validate that it mattered. He'd felt it himself once, before he'd learned that sentiment was a luxury their world couldn't afford. But he'd also learned something else in 3 decades of survival. Sometimes the most dangerous people weren't the ones with guns or money or connections. Sometimes they were the ones with nothing left to lose except their need for truth. And Lena Moore, standing there with her USB drive and her 3 years of patience, was exactly that kind of dangerous. "You've got courage," he said finally. "I'll give you that. Stupidity too, but courage." He glanced at Alessandro, then back at Lena. "But before we discuss any deals, I need to know something. You said there were 14 bodies, not 15. You said someone walked out. If you don't think that was me, then who?" Lena's expression shifted, something flickering across her face that looked almost like uncertainty. "That's the part one haven't figured out yet," she admitted. "My father called me that night, right before the fire started. He said something was wrong, that he felt like they'd walked into a trap. He told me to take care of my mother, that he loved me." Then the line went dead. "By the time I got to the warehouse, it was already an inferno." She swallowed hard, and for the first time, Victor saw the girl beneath the careful mask. Saw the 18-year-old who'd lost her entire family in one night, who'd spent 3 years building herself into someone capable of confronting the monsters she blamed. "But I saw someone leaving," Lena continued, her voice dropping. "Through the smoke, through the chaos. I couldn't see their face, but I saw someone walk out of that warehouse right before the roof collapsed. Someone who moved like they knew exactly what was about to happen. And I've spent 3 years trying to figure out who." "And you think I know," Victor finished. "I think you were there. I think you were part of the meeting that went wrong. And I think you know exactly who walked out of that warehouse while 14 people burned alive." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Victor could deny it. Could have Marco put a bullet in her head and dump her body in the ocean, make this problem disappear the way he'd made hundreds of problems disappear before. Could take the USB drive and whatever other evidence she had and erase Lena Moore from existence. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way she was looking at him, not with hate, but with desperate need for closure. Maybe it was recognition of his younger self in her determination. Maybe it was just the calculation that she'd prepared for her own death and had contingencies in place that would release that information if she disappeared. Or maybe, for the first time in decades, Victor Hale felt something approaching guilt. "All right," he said slowly. "You want the truth? I'll give you the truth. But not here. Not with an audience. And not until I verify that what you're claiming to have on that USB drive is actually what you say it is." "How do I know you won't just kill me the moment we're alone?" Lena asked. "You don't," Victor replied honestly. "But you walked into this restaurant tonight knowing that was a possibility. You broke your cover, confronted me in front of witnesses, and made yourself a target. You're already committed. The only question now is whether you trust that I'm more interested in controlling information than creating a mess." He could see her weighing the options, running through scenarios in her mind. She was smart, smarter than he'd given her credit for. Smart enough to be truly dangerous. "Tomorrow night," Lena said finally. "Meet me at Pier 47, midnight. It's public enough that you won't risk making a scene, private enough that we can talk freely. I'll bring the drive, you bring the truth." "And if I don't show up?" Victor asked. Lena's smile was cold. "Then copies of everything on this drive get delivered to 7 different organizations, including the Konstantin Bratva, along with detailed information about your current operations. By dawn, you'll have a war on your hands that makes the warehouse fire look like a barbecue accident." Alessandro whistled low. "She's got teeth, Hale. I'll give her that." Victor ignored him, focused entirely on the woman who'd just checkmated him in the most unexpected way possible. "Pier 47, he agreed. "Midnight. Come alone." "Same to you," Lena countered. "This is between us. No one else." She moved toward the door, and Marco shifted to block her path. Victor waved him aside. "Let her go." "Boss," Marco started. "I said let her go." Lena paused at the doorway, looked back over her shoulder. "Thank you for the conversation, Mr. Hale. And for what it's worth, I hope the truth is something I can live with. For both our sakes." Then she was gone, disappearing into the main restaurant like smoke dispersing in wind. Alessandro let out a long breath. That, he said, was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've seen in 20 years. What are you going to do? Victor stared at the space where Lena had stood, his mind already working through angles and possibilities. I'm going to give her what she wants, he said quietly. The truth. And then? Marco pressed. And then, Victor replied, we'll see if she really is as prepared for it as she thinks she is. Victor Hale didn't sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse overlooking the city, a glass of 30-year-old scotch untouched on the table beside him, and did what he always did when confronted with a problem: he gathered information. By 3 a.m, he knew everything there was to know about Lena Marie Castellano. Born in Brooklyn, March 15, 1999. Father, Antonio Castellano, low-level distributor who'd worked for 6 different organizations over a 15-year career. Mother, Sofia Castellano, née Russo, died of ovarian cancer 14 months after the warehouse fire. Brother, Michael Castellano, 19 years old at the time of his death, studying computer science at community college, no criminal record. The family had been unremarkable. The kind of people who existed in the margins of the criminal world, close enough to see how it worked, never important enough to be players. Antonio had been careful, never greedy, never ambitious. He'd done his job, collected his pay, and gone home to his family. Until the night he'd been in the wrong place at the worst possible time. Victor pulled up the file on the warehouse fire, reading through details he'd buried so deep he'd almost convinced himself they'd never happened. February 12, 3 years ago. A meeting that was supposed to be routine. The Konstantin Bratva wanted to negotiate passage through Victor's territory, willing to pay fair percentage for the privilege. Simple business. Except Yuri Konstantin hadn't come to negotiate. He'd come to take. Victor remembered the moment it had all gone wrong. The way Yuri had smiled, that cold, dead smile that said he'd already decided how this would end, and pulled a gun. The way his men had blocked the exits. The way Antonio Castellano and the other workers had suddenly realized they weren't just witnesses to a business deal, they were leverage in a hostile takeover. You have 2 choices, Hale, Yuri had said in that thick Russian accent. You give me Brooklyn, or everyone in this room dies, and I take it anyway. Victor had made the only choice he could make. He'd fought back. The firefight had lasted maybe 3 minutes. Victor's men against Yuri's, bullets tearing through wooden crates and metal shelving, sparks igniting chemicals that should have been stored more carefully. Antonio and the other workers had tried to run, trapped between crossfire and locked doors, desperate to survive something that had nothing to do with them. And then the fire had started. Victor had gotten out. So had 3 of his men. Yuri and 2 of his crew had made it through the smoke. But everyone else, 14 people, including Antonio Castellano and his son Michael, had burned. The Bratva had retreated after that, not because they'd been beaten but because the fire had attracted too much attention. Police, firefighters, investigators. The kind of heat that made smart criminals disappear. By the time the smoke cleared, Yuri had pulled his organization back to Russian territory, and Victor had spent a fortune making sure the investigation concluded it was an accident. He'd buried it. Moved on. Built his empire higher on that foundation of ash and bodies. But he'd never forgotten Antonio's face in those last moments. The terror, the confusion, the desperate need to survive for a family waiting at home. Victor had seen that expression on too many faces over the years. Had learned to stop seeing it as anything more than collateral damage in a war where sympathy was a weakness. Now that man's daughter was demanding answers. And she had leverage that could destroy everything he'd built. Victor picked up his phone, dialed a number he rarely used. It's 4 a.m, came the irritated response. Thomas Shaw, Tommy to the few people he allowed to call him that, was Victor's information specialist. If you needed to know something about someone, Tommy could find it. Bank records, criminal history, dental records, the name of their first-grade teacher. He was a magician with databases and dark web connections. I need everything on Lena Marie Castellano, Victor said. And I mean everything. Where she's lived for the past 3 years, who she's talked to, what she's been doing. I want to know if she's working alone or if someone's backing her. This about the girl from Marino's? Tommy asked, suddenly alert. News traveled fast in their world. How do you already know about that? Alessandro's people are talking. Word is some waitress threatened you in front of half the Eastern Seaboard's power players. People are curious whether you're losing your touch. Victor's jaw tightened. Find out what I need to know, Tommy. I want the report by noon. That's 8 hours, boss. For a deep dive on someone who's clearly been careful. Then I suggest you stop talking to me and start working. Victor ended the call, drained the scotch in one burning swallow, and stared out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Lena Moore was probably not sleeping either. Probably running through her plan, checking for holes, preparing for their meeting at the pier. She'd been smart. Confronting him publicly meant he couldn't simply make her disappear without questions being asked. Offering information instead of demanding money meant she'd framed this as negotiation, not blackmail. And choosing a public meeting location showed tactical awareness most career criminals didn't have. 3 years. She'd spent 3 years preparing for this. What else had she prepared for? Lena's hands were shaking as she unlocked the door to her apartment, a studio in a building that had seen better decades, with water stains on the ceiling and neighbors who minded their own business because they all had reasons to avoid attention. She'd done it. Actually done it. Confronted Victor Hale, played her hand, and walked out alive. The adrenaline was finally crashing, leaving her hollow and trembling. She collapsed onto her second-hand couch, buried her face in her hands, and let herself feel the terror she'd been suppressing for the past 3 hours. She could have died tonight. Still might die tomorrow. Victor could show up at the pier with a dozen men and a bullet with her name on it, and all her planning would mean nothing. But she'd looked into his eyes. Seen the calculation there, yes, but also something else. Curiosity. Maybe even respect. And she'd seen the moment he'd remembered her father. That flicker of recognition when she'd said Antonio's name. The slight tension in his shoulders. The way his expression had shuttered, going carefully blank. Victor Hale knew exactly what had happened in that warehouse. And tomorrow night, she'd finally get the answers she'd been chasing for 3 years. Lena pulled out her phone, opened the encrypted app she'd installed months ago, and typed a quick message, Phase 1 complete. Meeting tomorrow midnight, Pier 47. The response came back within seconds, be careful. Men like Hale don't negotiate, they eliminate threats. Make sure you have your exit strategy ready. Lena smiled grimly at the screen. Exit strategy. As if she'd planned any of this expecting to survive. She opened her laptop, pulled up the files she'd spent 8 months compiling. Shipping manifests photographed during bathroom breaks. Overheard conversations transcribed from memory in the staff bathroom. Names and dates and locations, all meticulously documented. The USB drive she'd shown Victor contained all of it, but it wasn't the only copy. She had backups scattered across encrypted cloud storage, with dead man switches that would release everything if she didn't check in at specific times. She'd learned that from Michael, actually. Her brother's computer science studies had included information security, and he'd taught her the basics before. Lena closed her eyes against the memory. Michael's laugh. Her father's rough hands that always smelled like motor oil and coffee. Her mother's smile in the wedding photo that sat on Lena's makeshift altar, surrounded by candles that she lit every night. All gone. All ashes. And tomorrow, she'd finally know why. A knock at the door made her freeze. It was nearly 5 in the morning. Nobody knocked at 5 in the morning unless something was very wrong. Lena grabbed the knife she kept in the couch cushions, a habit from living in neighborhoods where locks were suggestions, and approached the door carefully. Who is it? Delivery for Castellano. Her blood went cold. Nobody called her Castellano. She'd been Moore for 3 years, ever since she'd legally changed her name to disappear from anyone searching for Antonio's family. I didn't order anything, she called through the door. It's from an old friend, the voice replied. Male, accented, Eastern European, maybe. Says you've been asking questions about a fire. Lena's heart hammered. This was a test or a trap or both. Victor, checking to see if she'd panic. Or maybe the Bratva, if they'd somehow learned she was digging into that night. She opened the door with the chain still engaged, knife hidden behind her back. The man standing in the hallway was maybe 60, gray-haired and ordinary-looking except for his eyes. They were the eyes of someone who'd seen terrible things and done worse. He held up a manila envelope. I'm not going to hurt you, he said quietly. I'm here because someone thinks you deserve to know the truth. The real truth, Not whatever sanitized version Hale is planning to feed you. Who sent you? Someone who was there that night. Someone who's been living with what happened ever since. He extended the envelope through the gap in the door. Read it. Then decide if you still want to meet Hale tomorrow. Because once you know everything, you can't unknow it. Lena took the envelope carefully, half expecting it to explode or release poison gas or some other Hollywood trap. Instead, it was just paper. Heavy, expensive paper, with a wax seal she didn't recognize. Who was there? She demanded. Who's the 15th person? The man smiled sadly. Read the letter. And Lena? Whatever you decide to do with that information, be smart about it. The truth has a way of getting people killed. Then he was walking away, disappearing down the stairs before Lena could ask anything else. She closed the door, locked it, checked all 3 locks twice, then stared at the envelope in her hands. It was addressed simply, for the daughter of Antonio Castellano. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal, pulled out several pages of handwritten text. The handwriting was elegant, educated, completely at odds with the violent world it described. Dear Lena, you don't know me, but I knew your father. I was in the warehouse the night he died. I was the 15th person. My name is Nikolai Konstantin. Was Yuri Konstantin's younger brother. And I'm writing this because you deserve to know that your father died a hero, not a victim. Lena's hands went numb. Konstantin. The Bratva family that had started the war with Victor. The people responsible for. She forced herself to keep reading. The meeting that night was a setup from the beginning. My brother never intended to negotiate. He wanted Victor's territory, and he was willing to start a war to get it. I went along because that's what family does in our world. We support each other, even when we know it's wrong. But your father changed that. When the shooting started, when the fire began, everyone panicked. Victor's men were fighting to escape. My brother's men were trying to finish the job. And the workers, your father, your brother, the others, were trapped in the crossfire. Your father could have run. There was a moment, maybe 30 seconds, when the back exit was clear. He could have saved himself. Instead, he went back for your brother. Michael had been shot, not fatally, but enough to slow him down. He was disoriented from the smoke, crawling in the wrong direction. Your father went back through flames that were already consuming the building, grabbed Michael, and dragged him toward the exit. I saw this because I was also trying to escape. I'd been shot in the shoulder, was barely conscious, but I saw your father with your brother. Saw him make that choice. They almost made it out. But a support beam collapsed. Blocked the exit. Trapped them 15 feet from safety. Your father looked at me through the smoke and flames. And he said something I've never forgotten. Tell my daughter I loved her. Tell her this wasn't her fault. I didn't understand what he meant then. But I do now. Because he'd called you that night, hadn't he? Called to say goodbye. And you probably spent 3 years thinking you should have done something, should have warned him, should have saved him somehow. He knew you'd blame yourself. That's why he wanted me to tell you it wasn't your fault. I got out because I was close to a window that the fire hadn't reached yet. I smashed through it, fell 15 feet into the water, and somehow survived. By the time I crawled back to shore, the entire building was engulfed. Everyone still inside was dead. I never told my brother I survived. I let him think I died in that fire, and I disappeared. Started a new life far from the Bratva, far from the violence. Because I couldn't live with what we'd done anymore. But I've been watching. I heard through old contacts that someone was asking questions about the warehouse fire. That a girl was working at Marino's, serving Victor Hale, gathering information. I knew it had to be you. So I'm telling you this, Victor Hale is not the villain in this story. My brother was. Victor was defending his territory, his people. The fire was an accident born of violence, yes, but it wasn't murder. It was war. And your father was a hero who chose love over survival in his final moments. I'm telling you this because tomorrow, when you meet with Hale, you'll be facing the wrong man. The person responsible for your family's death is dead himself. My brother died in a police raid 18 months ago. There's no one left to punish. No one left to blame. Except the world we all chose to be part of. What you do with this information is your choice. But please, Lena, don't waste your life chasing vengeance against someone who doesn't deserve it. Your father gave his life so you could live. Honor that sacrifice by actually living. With regret and respect. Nikolai. The letter fell from Lena's hands. She stood there, frozen, as everything she'd believed for 3 years crumbled around her. Her father hadn't been a victim. He'd been a hero. Victor wasn't the monster she'd built him up to be in her mind. And the real villain, the person who'd actually caused the fire, was already dead. 3 years. 3 years of planning, preparing, building herself into someone capable of confrontation and revenge. 3 years of imagining Victor Hale as the devil who'd stolen her family. All of it based on a misunderstanding. Lena sank to the floor, back against the wall, and finally, for the first time since the night of the fire, she let herself cry. Not the silent tears she'd shed at funerals and alone in the dark, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere ancient and wounded. She cried for her father, who'd chosen death over abandoning his son. She cried for Michael, who'd never gotten the chance to graduate, to fall in love, to live. She cried for her mother, who'd wasted away from grief as much as cancer. And she cried for herself, for the girl she'd been at 18, and the weapon she'd turned herself into over 3 years of misdirected rage. When the tears finally stopped, when she could breathe again without her chest hitching, Lena picked up the letter and read it again. Then again. Looking for lies. For manipulation. For any sign that this was another layer of the game. But the details were too specific. The description of her father's last moments too intimate. And there, at the bottom of the last page, was a phone number. If you need to verify any of this, call me. I'll tell you everything. Lena checked the time. 6:30 in the morning. Too early to call. Or maybe not early enough. She dialed the number. It rang 4 times before a familiar voice answered. I was wondering if you'd call. Tell me everything, Lena said, her voice raw. Tell me exactly what happened that night. Every detail. Because tomorrow at midnight, I'm meeting Victor Hale, and I need to know if I'm confronting a murderer or just another survivor. Then sit down, Nikolai replied. Because this is going to take a while. And Lena? When I'm done, you're going to have a choice to make. A choice that will determine what kind of person you become. What choice? Whether you want justice, Nikolai said quietly, or just someone to blame. Nikolai Konstantin spoke for 2 hours. He described everything, the smell of gunpowder mixing with chemical smoke, the exact position of every person in that warehouse, the sound of her brother's voice calling for their father, the way Antonio had moved through flames like they were nothing because love made men invincible for just long enough to matter. By the time he finished, the sun was rising, painting Lena's shabby apartment in gold that felt like mockery. So Victor tried to save people, Lena said flatly. After the shooting started. After his war with your brother put everyone in danger. Yes, Nikolai confirmed. He got 3 workers out before the smoke got too thick. Your father would have been the 4th if that beam hadn't fallen. Victor tried, Lena. The firefighters found him unconscious 50 feet from the building, smoke inhalation so severe he was hospitalized for a week. He went back in 3 times trying to reach survivors. Lena wanted to hate this information. Wanted to reject it, find holes in the story, prove it was lies designed to protect Victor's reputation. But she couldn't. Because it explained things that had never made sense. Like why Victor had paid for all 14 funerals anonymously. Why substantial deposits had appeared in her mother's account during her cancer treatment. Money Lena had assumed came from her father's life insurance, but the amounts had been wrong, too generous. Blood money. Guilt money. Money from a man trying to buy redemption he'd never be able to purchase. I still don't understand, Lena said. If he tried to save them, why cover it up? Why make it look like an accident instead of admitting there was a fight? Because admission meant investigation, Nikolai explained. Investigation meant exposing operations worth hundreds of millions. It meant war between organizations scrambling to protect their interests. It meant more death, more families destroyed. Victor chose the practical solution: bury the truth, compensate the families quietly, move forward. The practical solution, Lena repeated bitterly. My father and brother burned alive, and the practical solution was to pretend it never happened. I'm not saying it was right, Nikolai said gently. I'm saying it was survival. That's how our world works. That's how it's always worked. Lena ended the call, sat in silence as morning light filled her apartment, and tried to figure out who she was now that the foundation of her identity for 3 years had been revealed as sand. She was still holding the phone when it rang. Unknown number. Hello. Miss Moore. Victor's voice, measured and calm. I assume you've had an interesting morning. Lena's blood went cold. You sent Nikolai. I did no such thing, Victor replied. But I have people who monitor unusual activities in my world. When Nikolai Konstantin, a ghost who's been dead for 3 years, suddenly surfaces to hand-deliver a letter to you, I get notified. So I'm calling to ask, what did he tell you? Lena's mind raced. This was a test. Victor wanted to know if she'd believe Nikolai, if his story would change her approach, if she'd abandon her confrontation now that she knew the truth. Or what she'd been told was the truth. He told me you're not the villain I thought you were, Lena said carefully. That my father died a hero. That your brother Yuri started the fire, not you. Yuri was Nikolai's brother, not mine, Victor corrected. But yes, Yuri Konstantin is responsible for what happened that night. And he's been dead for 18 months, killed in a raid on one of his weapons facilities. So there's no one left to punish. No, Victor agreed. Which makes our meeting tonight more interesting, doesn't it? Because now you know I'm not your enemy. So what do you want from me, Lena? She closed her eyes, tried to sort through the tangle of emotions, grief, anger, confusion, and something else she couldn't name. I want to know why you didn't tell me, she said finally. When I confronted you at Marino's. You could have explained then. Could have told me about Yuri, about trying to save people. Instead you agreed to meet me, let me think I had leverage. Because, Victor said, you had spent 3 years preparing for that confrontation. 3 years building yourself into someone capable of facing me. If I'd simply explained the truth in front of Alessandro and the others, you would have looked foolish. Weak. And in our world, looking weak gets you killed. So you protected me, Lena said incredulously. By agreeing to a private meeting. I protected your dignity, Victor corrected. And yes, I wanted to meet you privately because anyone who spends 3 years gathering intelligence on my organization deserves a conversation, not a bullet. You're smart, Lena. Disciplined. Patient. Those are rare qualities. What are you saying? I'm saying that tonight, when we meet at Pier 47, we're not going to discuss revenge or justice or your father's death. We're going to discuss your future. My future, Lena repeated. You think after everything. I think you spent 3 years learning my business better than some people I've employed for decades, Victor interrupted. I think you walked into a restaurant full of dangerous men and threatened me convincingly enough that everyone believed you had real power. I think you're wasting exceptional talent serving pasta to criminals when you could be so much more. Lena's breath caught. You offering me a job? I'm offering you a choice, Victor said. Come to the pier tonight. Bring your USB drive, bring your evidence, bring whatever weapons make you feel safe. And let's talk about what someone with your skills could accomplish if they stopped chasing ghosts and started building something real. And if I refuse? Then you walk away. I don't touch you, don't come after you, don't interfere with your life. You keep your evidence as insurance if it makes you feel better. But Lena? You'll spend the rest of your life wondering what could have been. Wondering if you wasted 3 years of preparation on revenge that no longer matters. The line went silent except for the sound of her own heartbeat. Midnight, Victor said. Pier 47. Come alone, or don't come at all. He ended the call before she could respond. Lena stared at her phone, trying to process what had just happened. In less than 12 hours, everything she'd believed had been dismantled. Her enemy was offering her employment. Her mission had become meaningless. And somewhere beneath the confusion and grief, a tiny voice whispered, what if he's right? What if you could be more? She pushed that voice down, focused on practical matters. Whether Victor was genuine or manipulating her, whether Nikolai's story was truth or careful fiction, she still had the meeting tonight. And she needed to be prepared for any outcome. Lena opened her laptop, pulled up the files she'd compiled over 8 months. Then she started creating something new. Not evidence of crimes, but an analysis. A detailed breakdown of Victor's operation showing inefficiencies, vulnerabilities, opportunities for improvement. If he wanted to see what her skills could do, she'd show him. If he planned to kill her, at least she'd die proving she was valuable. By 8 p.m., she had 30 pages of strategic analysis that would either get her hired or murdered. By 10 p.m., she was dressed in dark jeans, boots, and a jacket with enough pockets for the knife, pepper spray, and GPS tracker she'd bought years ago for exactly this kind of situation. By 11 p.m., she was standing outside Pier 47, watching fog roll in from the ocean, and questioning every decision that had led her to this moment. The pier was exactly what she'd chosen it to be, public enough to have occasional foot traffic, private enough for conversation. Old wooden planks that creaked underfoot, fishing boats bobbing in their slips, the smell of salt and diesel fuel and fish. At 11:45, a black Mercedes pulled up. Not subtle, but Victor had never needed to be. He stepped out alone, dressed casually in dark slacks and a leather jacket. No visible weapons, but Lena knew better than to assume that meant unarmed. "You came early," Victor said, walking onto the pier with easy confidence. "That's good. Shows you're serious." "I'm always serious," Lena replied. She stayed 20 feet back, maintaining distance that would give her time to react if this went wrong. "I know. That's what makes you interesting." Victor stopped at the pier's edge, looked out at the dark water. "Did you bring the USB drive? Did you bring the truth?" "I brought something better." Victor reached into his jacket slowly, giving her time to see he wasn't drawing a weapon, and pulled out a folder. "This is everything I know about your father. His employment history with me, the work he did, the reputation he had. And this," he pulled out a photograph, held it up so she could see, "is your father pulling a worker named James Crawford out of the warehouse. James survived because of Antonio. He lives in Pennsylvania now, has 3 kids, never knew who saved his life that night." Lena's vision blurred. The photograph showed her father, face covered in soot, dragging an unconscious man through smoke. The image quality was poor, probably from a security camera, but there was no mistaking Antonio's profile, his determined expression, the way he'd gripped the other man like he was carrying treasure. "I've kept this for 3 years, Victor continued. "Couldn't release it without raising questions about why there were cameras in a warehouse that officially didn't have security. But I kept it because your father deserved to be remembered as more than a casualty count." He walked forward slowly, extended the folder. "This is what I can give you, Lena. Not justice, because the guilty party is dead. Not revenge, because there's no one left to punish. Just truth. The real story of what happened that night, and proof that your father died the way heroes die, protecting someone else's chance to live." Lena took the folder with trembling hands, opened it, and found page after page of documentation. Photos of her father at work, records showing his reliability, witness statements about the night of the fire. And a handwritten note in Victor's distinctive script: "Antonio Castellano was a better man than most in our world. His daughter deserves to know that." "Why?" Lena whispered. "Why keep all this? Why care?" "Because," Victor said quietly, "I was 14 when I watched my father bleed out because he borrowed money from the wrong people. I spent 3 decades building an empire to make sure I'd never be that helpless again. And somewhere along the way, I forgot that the people who work for me, the Antonio Castellanos and the James Crawfords, they're not just assets. They are fathers and brothers and sons. People who matter to someone." He stepped back, gave her space. "Your father's death reminded me of that. Cost me sleep for months. Still does, some nights. So yes, I kept records. I tried to make amends. And when his daughter showed up threatening to dismantle my empire, I saw it as an opportunity." "Opportunity for what?" "To stop one more person from making the same mistakes I did," Victor said. "You've spent 3 years learning to be like me, Lena. Cold. Calculating. Willing to sacrifice everything for a goal. But you don't have to be. You can use those skills for something better." "Working for you?" Lena asked, skepticism sharp in her voice. "Working with me," Victor corrected. "I'm expanding into legitimate businesses. Real estate, import-export, consulting. I need people who understand both worlds, the criminal and the legitimate. People who can move between them, build bridges, help transition operations into something sustainable." He met her eyes, and for the first time, Lena saw something in them besides calculation. Something that looked almost like hope. "I'm offering you a job," yes. But more than that, I'm offering you purpose. A way to honor your father by making sure other families don't suffer what yours did. Help me build something better. Lena looked down at the folder in her hands, at her father's face captured in that moment of heroism, and felt something shift inside her chest. 3 years of anger, dissolving into something more complex. Something that felt almost like possibility. I need time, she said finally. To think. To figure out if I can work with someone whose world killed my family, even if you weren't directly responsible. Take all the time you need, Victor said. But Lena? Whatever you decide, you're not invisible anymore. You stepped out of the shadows last night at Marino's. People in our world know your name now. They'll be watching to see what you do next. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. The USB drive you mentioned, the information you gathered. Was it real? Lena smiled slightly, the first genuine smile she'd felt in years. Every word. Every date. Every route. 8 months of documentation that could cause you serious problems. Victor actually laughed. Keep it. Consider it insurance. And if you decide to work with me, consider it your entrance exam, you passed with distinction. Then he was walking back to his car, leaving Lena alone on the pier with a folder full of truths and decisions that would define the rest of her life. She stood there until the Mercedes disappeared into fog, then pulled out her phone and called the one person who might understand. Nikolai? It's Lena. I need advice about something impossible. Impossible decisions, Nikolai said warmly, are just opportunities in disguise. Tell me everything. Lena didn't give Victor an answer for 3 days. She spent those 72 hours doing what she did best, gathering information, analyzing angles, looking for the trap she was certain had to exist. Nobody in Victor Hale's position offered employment to someone who'd threatened them unless there was an ulterior motive. But the more she dug, the more confused she became. Victor's legitimate business expansion was real. Over the past 18 months, he'd been systematically moving assets into legal enterprises, buying apartment complexes, investing in shipping companies, establishing consulting firms that provided security services to corporations. On paper, it looked like a man preparing for retirement from the criminal world. On deeper examination, it looked like something more interesting, evolution. He's building an empire that can survive without him, Tommy Shaw told her when she tracked him down at a coffee shop in Queens. Tommy was nervous meeting her, word had spread about the confrontation at Marino's, and being seen with Victor Hale's potential enemy was dangerous, but curiosity had won out over caution. What do you mean? Lena asked, stirring coffee she had no intention of drinking. Victor's 42, Tommy explained, keeping his voice low. In our world, that's ancient. Most guys either die young or end up in prison by that age. The ones who survive long enough to see 40 start thinking about legacy. About what happens when they are gone. So he wants to go legitimate. He wants to build something that outlasts him, Tommy corrected. The criminal stuff still happens, but it's being compartmentalized, managed by people who can take the fall if things go wrong. Meanwhile, the legitimate businesses grow bigger, more profitable, more sustainable. In 10 years, Victor Hale could be a respected businessman with a questionable past that nobody can quite prove. Lena absorbed this, pieces clicking together. And he needs people who understand both worlds to make that transition work. Exactly. Tommy leaned forward, his expression intense. That's why he wants you, Lena. You're not part of the old guard. You don't have loyalty to the way things have always been done. You're smart enough to see opportunities they'd miss, and you're motivated by something other than money or power. What am I motivated by? Making sure what happened to your family doesn't happen to others, Tommy said simply. Victor knows that. He's betting that your moral compass, twisted as it might be after 3 years of planning revenge, will actually make you better at building legitimate businesses than the sociopaths he usually employs. Lena sat back, stunned by how accurately Victor had read her. Did he send you to convince me? He doesn't know I'm here, Tommy admitted. I came because I'm tired, Lena. Tired of watching good people get destroyed by this world. Your father was a good man. If his daughter can help transform even a piece of this empire into something legitimate, something that doesn't leave families destroyed, that's worth encouraging. He stood to leave, then paused. One more thing. Victor's been attending your mother's grave every month for the past 2 years. Puts flowers there himself. Never misses a visit. I thought you should know that. Tommy disappeared into the crowd before Lena could respond. She sat there for another hour, coffee going cold, mind spinning with implications. Victor visited her mother's grave. The man she'd spent 3 years painting as a monster had been honoring her mother's memory while Lena planned his downfall. That evening, she went to the cemetery. Sure enough, there were fresh flowers on Sofia Castigliano's headstone. White roses, her mother's favorites, something Lena had never told anyone because how would it have come up in conversation? But Victor had known. Had researched her family thoroughly enough to learn that detail and remember it. Lena knelt beside the grave, ran her fingers over the engraved dates that represented her mother's too short life. I don't know what to do, Mom, she whispered. I spent 3 years becoming someone you wouldn't recognize. Someone hard and calculating and ready to destroy another human being. And now I find out he's not the monster I needed him to be. He's just complicated. Flawed. Trying to be better. The wind rustled through trees overhead, carrying the scent of fresh earth and flowers. Dad would probably tell me to forgive him, Lena continued. Dad always believed in second chances. But Michael? Michael would want me to be practical. To use this opportunity to actually change things instead of just burning it all down out of principle. She stood, brushed dirt from her knees, and made her decision. Victor was in his office, the legitimate one, in a high-rise overlooking the harbor, when his assistant buzzed him. Sir, there's a Lena Moore here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment. Victor smiled slightly. Send her in. Lena entered wearing clothes he'd never seen her in before, a professional blazer over dark pants, hair down instead of pulled back, minimal makeup that somehow made her look both softer and more formidable. She transformed from waitress to businesswoman in 3 days, and the change was striking. Miss Moore, he greeted, standing. I wasn't expecting to hear from you so soon. I'm accepting your offer, Lena said without preamble. But I have conditions. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. Victor gestured to the chair across from his desk. Please. Lena sat, pulled out a tablet, and brought up a document. I've spent 3 days analyzing your operations. I found 17 inefficiencies in your supply chain, 12 security vulnerabilities, and 8 opportunities for expansion you're not currently exploiting. She turned the tablet toward him, and Victor found himself looking at a presentation that would have impressed consultants charging 6 figures. I'm willing to work for you, Lena continued, but not in the criminal operations. I want to help build the legitimate side of your empire. Real estate, import-export, consulting. The businesses that can exist in daylight. Those businesses are less profitable, Victor pointed out. In the short term, Lena agreed. But they are sustainable. They won't put you in prison or get you killed. And they can employ people like my father was, people who need work but don't want to be criminals. Give them legitimate options, and you reduce the workforce available to your competitors. Victor leaned back, studying her with new appreciation. You've thought this through. I've thought about nothing else for 3 days. Lena's expression was fierce. If I'm going to work with you, it's not going to be as some mindless employee who follows orders. I'm going to challenge you, push back when I think you're wrong, and actively work to move your empire away from the activities that destroy families. That's a tall order, Victor said mildly. That's my condition for accepting. Lena met his eyes without flinching. You want someone who understands both worlds? Fine. But I'm going to use that understanding to dismantle the criminal side piece by piece while building up the legitimate operations. And you're going to let me, because deep down, you want the same thing. Silence stretched between them, charged with challenge and possibility. Then Victor laughed, a real laugh, not the calculated sound he usually made at business meetings. You're either brilliant or insane. I haven't decided which. Can't I be both? Lena asked, and found herself almost smiling. You start Monday, Victor said. Salary is negotiable, but I'm thinking 6 figures to start. You'll have access to all legitimate business operations and limited access to other activities, strictly for context and transition planning. I want 7 figures, Lena countered. And full access to financial records. Can't transform what I can't see. 7 figures after you prove yourself, Victor replied. 6 months trial period. If you're as good as you think you are, we renegotiate. Deal. Lena stood, extended her hand. Victor shook it, and the moment their hands touched, something unexpected happened. A spark of awareness that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with two people who'd survived their respective hells recognizing something kindred in each other. Lena pulled her hand back quickly, professional mask sliding into place. I'll need an office. And a team. Can't do this alone. You'll have both, Victor assured her. But Lena? This world I'm bringing you into, the legitimate side still intersects with the criminal operations. You're going to see things, hear things, meet people who make you uncomfortable. Can you handle that? I served dinner to murderers and thieves for 8 months, Lena reminded him. I think I can handle uncomfortable. Fair enough. Victor walked her to the door, then paused. One question. The USB drive with all your evidence, are you keeping it as insurance against me? Lena smiled enigmatically. Let's just say I believe in contingency planning. But Victor? If you're genuine about building something better, you'll never need to worry about that drive. It only becomes relevant if you betray what you're claiming to want. A built-in moral compass, Victor mused. I like it. Keeps me honest. That's the idea. As Lena walked out, Victor returned to his desk and pulled up her file. 3 years of meticulous planning. 8 months of flawless undercover work. Intelligence that matched most of his senior advisors. And a moral framework that could either be his greatest asset or his ultimate downfall. He was betting everything that it would be the former. His phone buzzed. Tommy Shaw. I hear congratulations are in order, Tommy said. She accepted. She did. And Tommy? I need you to dig deeper into her background. Not because I don't trust her, I'm starting to, actually, but because if she's this good at hiding in plain sight, there might be other things about Lena Moore we don't know yet. Already on it, boss. And Victor? For what it's worth, I think you made the right call. She's special. Victor ended the call, stared out at the harbor where lights reflected off dark water, and wondered if he'd just hired his salvation or engineered his own destruction. Lena didn't go home after leaving Victor's office. Instead, she found herself at Pier 47 again, standing where she'd stood 3 days ago when everything had changed. Her phone rang. Nikolai. I heard you accepted his offer, Nikolai said without preamble. Are you sure about this? No, Lena admitted. But I'm sure about what I don't want. I don't want to waste 3 more years on revenge that won't bring my family back. This way, maybe I can honor them by preventing other families from being destroyed. Noble goal, Nikolai said. But be careful, Lena. Victor Hale is a complicated man. He wants to change, I believe that. But decades of survival instincts don't disappear overnight. There will be moments when the criminal and the reformer clash, and you'll be caught in the middle. I can handle it. I'm sure you can, Nikolai agreed. But there's something else you should know. Something I didn't include in the letter because I wasn't sure it mattered. Lena's stomach tightened. What? Your father and Victor knew each other before the night of the fire. They'd worked together on 3 previous jobs. Victor specifically requested Antonio for the warehouse meeting because he trusted him, thought having reliable workers present would keep things professional. The world tilted slightly. Victor requested my father specifically? Yes. He blamed himself for that afterward. Thought if he'd chosen different workers, Antonio and Michael might have survived. That's why he's been visiting your mother's grave. Why he kept those files. He's carrying guilt that's arguably not even his to carry. Lena closed her eyes, processed this new information. Victor hadn't just been at the warehouse, he'd been responsible for her father being there in the first place. Does he know that I know this? She asked. I don't know, Nikolai admitted. But Lena? That guilt he carries? It's real. It's the reason he's trying to change. Your father's death, your family's destruction, it broke something in Victor that wealth and power couldn't fix. After the call ended, Lena stood on the pier for another hour, watching waves and processing the impossible complexity of her new reality. She'd accepted a job from the man indirectly responsible for her family's deaths. A man who'd been trying to atone for 3 years while she'd been planning his destruction. A man who saw in her the possibility of redemption for sins he couldn't undo. And somewhere beneath all the complexity and moral ambiguity, Lena realized something that terrified her more than any confrontation or threat. She was starting to understand Victor Hale. Starting to see him not as a monster or even as a man, but as someone like her, someone shaped by tragedy, trying to build meaning from loss, hoping that the next chapter could be better than the last. Monday morning, she would walk into his office and begin the strangest partnership of her life. But tonight, standing on the pier where she'd expected to end one story and instead had started another, Lena Moore allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, that maybe, possibly, impossibly, this could work. 4 months into her new position, Lena discovered that transforming a criminal empire was significantly harder than planning revenge. She'd established herself quickly, too quickly, some of Victor's old guard muttered. At 24, she was now director of legitimate operations, overseeing 3 real estate portfolios, 2 import companies, and a consulting firm that provided security services to Fortune 500 companies. But success brought visibility. And visibility brought danger. "We have a problem," Victor said, walking into her office without knocking, a habit that irritated her but she'd learned to tolerate. "The Calabrese family is asking questions about you." Lena looked up from the acquisition proposal she'd been reviewing. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that suggest they've figured out who you really are." Victor's expression was grim. "Alessandro's nephew, Paolo, has been digging into your background. He knows about Antonio Castigliano. About the warehouse fire. And he's wondering why I'd employ the daughter of someone who died in my territory." "What's his angle?" "He thinks you're either working with the FBI or planning to take me down from the inside." Victor sat on the edge of her desk, closer than professional distance required. Over 4 months, they developed a strange intimacy, not romantic, but something deeper. The intimacy of 2 people who'd seen each other's worst moments and chosen partnership anyway. "So we tell him the truth," Lena said. "That I was planning revenge, discovered the real story, and decided to build something better instead." "The truth makes you look weak," Victor countered. "Makes it seem like I manipulated you into abandoning your vendetta. In our world, perception is everything. If people think you're weak, they'll test you. And testing you means testing me." Lena stood, paced to the window that overlooked the harbor. Her office was smaller than Victor's but positioned on the same floor, a statement about her importance in the organization. "Then what do you suggest?" "We accelerate the transition," Victor said. "Move more operations legitimate, faster than planned. Make you indispensable enough that questioning you means questioning the future of the entire enterprise. If you're the architect of our evolution, attacking you becomes attacking everyone's profit margins. That could take years. We don't have years." Victor's voice carried an urgency she'd never heard before. "Paolo is meeting with the Constantine Bratva remnants. Yes, they've regrouped under new leadership, and discussing an alliance against me. They're positioning it as protecting the traditional way of doing business against my softness in going legitimate." Lena turned to face him. "They're planning to move against you." "Against us," Victor corrected. "You're my partner now. That makes you a target." The word partner hung in the air between them, carrying weight that had nothing to do with business. Over 4 months, their relationship had shifted in ways neither had anticipated. Late nights reviewing proposals had turned into conversations about their families, their fears, their dreams for what the empire could become. Lena had learned that Victor collected rare books and secretly funded scholarships for kids from broken homes. Victor had discovered that Lena spoke 3 languages and had a photographic memory she'd never mentioned because it seemed like showing off. They'd become friends. Maybe more than friends, though neither had acknowledged the tension that sparked whenever they stood too close. "How much time do we have?" Lena asked. "Paolo's meeting with the Bratva is scheduled for next week. After that? Days, maybe. They'll move fast once they've coordinated." Lena's mind raced through options, strategies, contingencies. The USB drive. Victor raised an eyebrow. "Your insurance policy. It contains information about Calabrese operations too. Routes, contacts, shipments. If we release it strategically, leak it to their competitors, we create chaos that forces Paolo to deal with immediate threats instead of long-term planning." "That's a nuclear option," Victor said. It would destabilize the entire eastern seaboard. Start wars between families. People would die. People are going to die anyway, Lena pointed out. The question is whether we control the chaos or let it control us. Victor studied her, and Lena saw the exact moment he recognized what she'd become. Not the grieving daughter seeking revenge. Not the waitress pretending to be invisible. But something new, a woman capable of making the hard choices their world demanded. 4 months ago, Victor said softly, you told me you wanted to honor your father by preventing families from being destroyed. Now you're suggesting we start a war. I'm suggesting we survive, Lena corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Victor stood, moved closer. Because from where I'm standing, you sound exactly like me. Like someone who's been in this world long enough to forget there are lines that shouldn't be crossed. His words hit like a physical blow. Lena looked down at her hands, the same hands that had served dinner and planned revenge and now strategized about starting wars, and felt something crack inside her chest. What's happening to me? She whispered. Victor's expression softened. He reached out, tilted her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. You're adapting. Surviving. Becoming what you need to be to succeed in this world. I'm becoming like you, Lena said, and it wasn't entirely an accusation. Maybe, Victor agreed. Or maybe I'm becoming like you. Maybe we're meeting somewhere in the middle, building something neither of us could create alone. The moment stretched, charged with everything they'd been carefully not acknowledging. Victor's hand was still on her chin, his thumb brushing her cheekbone in a gesture that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the connection they'd been fighting for months. Then Lena's phone buzzed, shattering the moment. She stepped back, checked the message. Her face went pale. What is it? Victor asked. It's from an unknown number. Says, your mother's grave is lovely this time of year. Would be a shame if something happened to it. Victor's expression went cold. The dangerous cold that reminded Lena why men feared him. They're threatening your family's memory. Trying to provoke you into doing something reckless. It's working, Lena said, fury burning through her veins. I don't care about territories or profit margins. You threaten my family, even their memory, and I will burn everything down. That's exactly what they want. Victor caught her arm as she moved toward the door. They're trying to separate us. Make you emotional. Make me look weak for not controlling you. We play into that, and we're done. Then what do we do? Lena demanded. Victor pulled out his phone, made a call. Tommy. I need surveillance on Westview Cemetery, specifically the Castellano plots. 24-hour coverage. Anyone who approaches gets photographed and followed. He paused. Because someone just made this personal, and I don't negotiate with people who threaten the dead. He ended the call, looked at Lena with an intensity that made her breath catch. We protect what matters, he said. Your family's memory. Our partnership. The future we're building. And we do it without becoming the monsters they expect us to be. How? Lena asked, voice breaking slightly. By being smarter. By using the leverage we have without destroying ourselves in the process. Victor moved to her desk, pulled up files on her computer. You have information on everyone. We don't release it indiscriminately. We use it surgically, target Paolo specifically, expose his operations in ways that don't create collateral damage. We make him the threat instead of us. Lena watched him work, saw the strategic mind that had built an empire, and felt something shift in her understanding. Victor wasn't just a criminal trying to go legitimate. He was a man trying to break a cycle of violence while still surviving in a violent world. And she, God help her, was falling for him. Victor, she said quietly. He looked up, and in his eyes, she saw the same recognition. The same impossible complication. I know, he said simply. But we can't. Not now. Not while we're fighting for survival. It would compromise everything. Would it? Lena moved closer. Or would it make us stronger? Give us something beyond business to fight for? Victor stood, and the space between them felt charged with electricity. Lena, if I kiss you right now, everything changes. Our partnership becomes personal. Our business decisions get complicated by emotion. And if something happens to you because of me, because of this world, I won't survive it. You don't get to make that choice for me, Lena said. I walked into this with my eyes open. I knew the risks. You didn't know this risk, Victor countered. You didn't know that somewhere between revenge and redemption, I'd fall in love with you. The words hung in the air, irreversible and true. Lena's breath caught. Victor. Don't, he interrupted. Don't say it back unless you mean it. Unless you're prepared for what it means in this world. Because loving me makes you a target in ways you can't imagine. I've been a target since birth, Lena replied. My father's choices made me a target. My own choices made me a target. At least this time, I'm choosing who I stand beside. She closed the distance between them, stood close enough that she could feel the heat of his body, see the war happening behind his eyes. I spent 3 years learning to hate you, she said softly. 4 months learning to respect you. And the past few weeks realizing that somewhere in all of this, I fell in love with the man you're trying to become. Not the criminal. Not even the businessman. The man who visits my mother's grave and tries to build something better. Victor's control finally cracked. He pulled her close, kissed her with 4 months of restrained want and the desperate knowledge that this was probably a mistake. But it felt like the only right thing in a world of wrong choices. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victor rested his forehead against hers. We're going to survive this, he said. Paolo, the Bratva, all of it. And when we do, we're going to build something extraordinary. Promise? Lena asked. I promise. The attack came 3 days later. Lena was working late, always working late now, because sleep felt like a luxury they couldn't afford, when the building's fire alarm triggered. She grabbed her phone, her laptop, and the emergency bag she'd kept packed since the first threat. Victor had insisted everyone in leadership have an escape plan, and Lena had learned not to question his paranoia. The hallways were filling with smoke. Not from a fire, she realized, but from canisters. Someone was forcing an evacuation. Her phone buzzed. Victor, rooftop. Now. Lena ran for the stairs, climbing even as she heard footsteps below her. Multiple people. Moving fast. She burst onto the rooftop to find Victor already there with Marco and 2 other security personnel. A helicopter was landing, its rotors creating a windstorm that made her stumble. They breached the building, Victor shouted over the noise. Paolo's people. They're coming for the files, for you, for anyone who can connect them to what we've learned. The files are encrypted, Lena shouted back. They don't need to decrypt them. They just need to destroy them, and us, to make their move. Victor grabbed her hand. We need to go. Now. What about everyone else in the building? Already evacuated. This wasn't about casualties. It's about sending a message. They boarded the helicopter just as the rooftop door burst open. Paolo Calabrese emerged with 6 armed men, guns drawn. Hail! Paolo shouted. This ends tonight. You want to go legitimate? Fine. But you don't get to take the rest of us down with you. That information stays buried. Victor's hand moved toward his weapon, but Lena caught his wrist. Wait, she said. Then, louder, calling to Paolo, you want the information? I'll give it to you. All of it. Everything I've collected. Lena, what are you doing? Victor hissed. Trust me, she whispered back. Then, to Paolo, but I want something in exchange. Safe passage. For both of us. You let us go, you get the USB drive, and this ends. Paolo laughed. You think I'm stupid? You've got copies. Backups. Dead man's switches. I do. Lena agreed. But they're set to release if I don't check in every 72 hours. You kill me, and everything goes public automatically. But if you let us go, I'll give you the encryption keys. All of them. You can verify the data, destroy it, and we disappear. Why would you do that? Paolo asked, suspicion heavy in his voice. You spent months gathering that intelligence. Because, Lena said, loud enough for everyone to hear, I've learned that information is only valuable if you're alive to use it. And I've learned that some wars aren't worth fighting. She could feel Victor's tension beside her, knew he was calculating odds and angles. But she also knew he trusted her judgment. For months had taught them to read each other like books. Paolo conferred with his men, then nodded slowly. Fine. Hand it over. But any tricks, and I start with your boyfriend. Lena pulled out the USB drive, the real one, not a decoy, and walked toward Paolo. Her heart hammered, but her hands were steady. She got within 10 feet before Paolo's expression changed. Wait, he said. This is too easy. You're. The rooftop erupted in chaos. Federal agents poured from the stairwell, from adjacent buildings, from positions that had been carefully prepared. FBI tactical teams in full gear, weapons trained, voices shouting commands to drop weapons and get on the ground. Paolo's face went white with rage and realization. You sold us out. You made a deal with the feds. No, Lena said calmly. I made a deal with reality. You were planning to kill us anyway. This way, we survive, and you face justice for the crimes you've committed. Victor pulled her back toward the helicopter as federal agents swarmed Paolo's position. When did you plan this? Victor asked as they lifted off, watching the chaos below them. 2 days ago, Lena admitted. After the threat to my mother's grave. I reached out to an FBI agent I'd researched, someone who's been trying to build a case against the Calabrese family for years. Offered her everything I had on Paolo in exchange for immunity for both of us and protection. Immunity, Victor repeated slowly. For both of us. You want to go legitimate? Lena said. This is how. We cooperate, provide testimony against the people still committed to the old ways, and we get clean slates. Fresh starts. The legitimate businesses stay intact, they're legal, and the criminal operations get dismantled by people who are actually supposed to enforce the law. Victor stared at her, and Lena couldn't read his expression. Anger? Admiration? Betrayal? Then he laughed, a real, genuine laugh that she'd only heard a handful of times. You brilliant, terrifying woman, he said. You just outmaneuvered the entire Calabrese family and forced my hand on going legitimate all in one move. Are you angry? Lena asked carefully. I should be, Victor admitted. You made a decision that affects my entire organization without consulting me. You leveraged our relationship and everything I've built to make a deal with the FBI. But, Victor continued, pulling her close as the helicopter banked away from the city, you also just gave us exactly what I've been trying to achieve for 2 years. A way out. A fresh start. A chance to build something real without looking over our shoulders constantly. So we're good? Lena asked. We're more than good, Victor said, and kissed her like they weren't fleeing a federal raid in a helicopter, like they had all the time in the world. We're free. The next 6 weeks were a blur of depositions, negotiations, and careful legal maneuvering. Lena and Victor provided testimony that dismantled 3 major criminal organizations. Paolo Calabrese received a 30-year sentence. The remnants of the Constantine Bratva were scattered or arrested. Dozens of smaller players took deals or fled the country. And through it all, Victor and Lena stood together, partners in crime, then partners in justice, and finally just partners. The immunity deal was comprehensive. In exchange for their cooperation and testimony, all charges related to their past activities were dropped. Victor's legitimate businesses were cleared of any criminal taint after thorough investigation. Lena's actions, gathering intelligence, working undercover at Marino's, were retroactively classified as cooperating with an ongoing federal investigation. They were, legally and officially, clean. It feels strange, Lena said, standing in Victor's penthouse, their penthouse now, after she'd moved in 3 weeks ago. Being able to walk around without looking over our shoulders. It feels like possibility, Victor replied, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they looked out at the city lights. Like we can actually build the future we've been talking about. What does that future look like? Lena asked. I've been thinking about that, Victor said. The real estate portfolio is doing well. The import business is expanding. But I want to do something more. Something that actually helps people. Like what? A foundation, Victor said. For families who've lost someone to violence. Job training programs. Scholarships. Housing assistance. All the things your family could have used after the warehouse fire. Lena toned in his arms, looked up at him with wonder and love. You want to honor them. I want to honor all of them, Victor said. Everyone who got caught in the crossfire. Everyone who suffered because of the choices people like me made. I can't undo the past, but maybe I can make the future better. The Castellano Hale Foundation, Lena said, testing the name. Just Castellano, Victor corrected. Your family deserves to be remembered. Mine deserves to be forgotten. Our family, Lena said softly. If we're building a future together, we're building a new legacy. One that honors the past while moving forward. Victor kissed her forehead, and Lena felt the last pieces of her grief, the sharp edges that had been driving her for 3 years, finally softening into something bearable. The doorbell rang. Victor frowned. Expecting anyone? No, Lena said, but moved to check the security camera. Her breath caught. It's Nikolai. Victor's expression tightened. He'd never met the man who'd given Lena the truth about the warehouse fire, but he nodded. Let him in. Nikolai Konstantin looked older than his 60 years, grey hair and a face marked by hard living. But his eyes were kind when they settled on Lena. Hello, little one, he said in that faint Russian accent. I heard about your testimony. About what you've accomplished. Your father would be proud. Lena hugged him, this stranger who'd become an unexpected guardian angel, and felt tears threaten. Thank you. For the letter. For the truth. For everything. I only told you what you deserved to know, Nikolai said. Then he looked at Victor, and something passed between them, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of shared guilt and shared redemption. Victor Hale, Nikolai said. The man my brother tried to destroy. And the man who's been trying to atone ever since. Nikolai Konstantin, Victor replied. The man who gave Lena the truth I was too cowardly to tell her myself. You weren't a coward, Nikolai said. You were protecting her. There's a difference. He pulled out an envelope, similar to the one he'd delivered months ago. But I came here tonight to give you both something. The final piece of the story. Lena took the envelope with trembling hands, opened it to find photographs. Old photographs, from before the fire. There was her father, young and smiling, standing next to a teenage Victor Hale. Both of them in work clothes, clearly at some job site. Your father and Victor knew each other longer than either of you realized, Nikolai explained. Victor was 16 when Antonio taught him how to drive a forklift. Antonio was the one who encouraged him to think bigger, to build something instead of just surviving. Lena looked up at Victor, saw the shock on his face. I didn't remember, Victor said quietly. Antonio Castellano. Jesus. He was Tony back then. He was kind to a scared kid who'd just lost his father. Gave me advice I didn't appreciate until years later. He saw potential in you, Nikolai continued. Used to say you were going to be someone important someday. That's why, 16 years later, when you needed reliable workers for that meeting, you requested him specifically. Not because he was expendable, but because you trusted him. Victor sank into a chair, looking at the photograph like it held answers to questions he'd been asking for decades. I got him killed, he whispered. The one person who showed me kindness when I needed it most, and I got him killed. No, Lena said firmly, kneeling beside him. Yuri Konstantin and his war got him killed. You were trying to protect him by having him there, thought his presence would keep things professional. You couldn't have known what would happen. She's right, Nikolai said. I've spent 3 years carrying guilt for my brother's actions. You've carried it even longer. But guilt doesn't honor the dead, Victor. Action does. Building something better does. And from what I've heard, that's exactly what you're doing. Victor looked at Lena, at the photograph, at the life they were building from the ashes of tragedy. The foundation, he said suddenly. The first scholarship. It goes to kids who've lost parents to violence. And it's named after Antonio Castellano, not as a memorial, but as a promise. That his life mattered. That it meant something. Lena's tears finally fell, but they were good tears. Healing tears. He would have liked that, she said. He would have liked you. He did like me, Victor said, looking at the photograph again. 16-year-old me who didn't know anything except how to survive. And he took time to teach me something useful. To show me kindness when the world had shown me none. He stood, pulled Lena close, and looked at Nikolai. Thank you, Victor said. For the truth. For the photograph. For helping her when I couldn't. Help each other now, Nikolai replied. Build something beautiful from all this ugliness. And remember, the best revenge against the violence that took our families is to create lives so full of love and purpose that the darkness can't touch us anymore. After Nikolai left, Victor and Lena stood together in the penthouse, holding the photograph, planning foundations and futures. We're really doing this, Lena said. Building something real. We really are, Victor agreed. And Lena? I know this started with revenge and transformed into partnership and somehow became love. But I need you to know, you're the best thing that ever happened to me. You saved me from becoming the monster I was afraid I'd turn into. You saved me too, Lena replied. From wasting my life on hate when I could have been building something worth living for. They kissed, and in that moment, everything felt possible. Not easy. Building legitimate businesses while maintaining boundaries with the criminal world would never be easy. Not safe. There would always be people who saw them as threats or opportunities. But possible. Real. Worth fighting for. We have come to the end of the story. Thank you for watching to the end. Share your opinion about this story in the comments below. I like getting feedback from my audience. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our heartwarming stories.